day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. And below this video, I'm attaching a link to a PDF you have to read if you want to know what China's motives are in South Africa. It's a fascinating document. And I'm just going to be reading a few extracts from it. So those people who don't want to go and get the document down and read the whole thing, I'm going to take you some relevant facts. And we're talking about corruption. We're talking about state capture. We're talking about what happened with the Guptas. It's happening right now in the ANC government with the Chinese. They've just changed the goalposts. Just a new party. The new colonialists, the Chinese, the honorary blacks. Ever wondered why the honorary blacks? Well, I'm going to explain to you just why they are. You'll be shocked. On page 13, at the bottom, and I'm just taking out selected extracts from this very comprehensive report because, you need to go and do your own research on this. As I say, the link to the PDF is below this video. Guo continues, multinational companies, or MNCs, and banks have learned that getting access means knowing whose palms to grease in South Africa. Many firms have taken to hiring the children of senior government officials, sometimes even paying their tuition at Western universities. Meanwhile, officials have taken advantage of loose financial controls and a lack of transparency to safeguard their illicit profits. Many officials hold a number of Chinese passports, often under different names, but with valid visas, and use them to travel abroad and stash their money in foreign bank accounts. As some corrupt Chinese officials and businessmen benefit from these junket trips and paid education for their children, they often choose to buy a second home in the country to which they regularly travel, in order to house their families on their frequent visits. While being a means to evade wealth regulation, affluent Chinese also covet overseas property owning as a status symbol. Owning a residence in another country reflects their desire for an international lifestyle. As abroad, they have quicker access to services and products which are not as easily available in their domestic surroundings. Another indirect push factor for overseas property acquisition by Chinese investors is the relatively higher labor cost in China. As the labor cost, hence overall production costs, increase, MNCs and big Chinese companies shift their operations overseas. During the course of the shifting process, Chinese multinationals also export their senior professionals and high-ranking administrators to the new countries, hosting their manufacturing plants. Though the junior and manual workers are recruited from amongst the local or of the new host country, this is where we're starting to get really interesting with when it comes to honorary blacks. Okay. Though the junior and manual workers are recruited from amongst the locals of the new host country, the higher positions are maintained by Chinese officials who eventually shift base to these new countries for a long term. Imperatively, this migration calls for the development, purchase, or rental of new residences for the Chinese professionals. Professor Guo talks about the case of Nokia. Nokia closed its 1 square kilometer factory, which employed 10,000 Chinese workers in China, and shifted to Vietnam. Similarly, Hisense and China 4 automakers have moved their manufacturing plants to South Africa. The expanding taste for luxury tourism among Chinese citizens is yet another reason for growing overseas property acquisitions. It is in light of the growth in Chinese luxury tourism that the Chinese government issued the first white paper on luxury tourism in 2012. Okay, on page 27 of the report, which, as I said before, is linked directly below this video. Although the extent of Chinese property ownership in South Africa, along with general foreign property ownership, is not alarming and is estimated to be less than 5%, it is the pace at which it is increasing and the domestic political context in South Africa presently which generates concerns over this phenomenon. The escalating sales of sectional title properties to Chinese citizens and projects such as Zendai and Modderfontein, which promise to cater to such demands, along with an increase in requests for permanent resident permits, shows that indeed South Africa is becoming one of the upcoming destinations for foreign property buyers from China and elsewhere. While it is economically beneficial addition to the economy, it is the current socio-economic situation of the country which threatens the harmonious welcoming of such foreign assimilation. Now, let's remember that the Chinese now have police stations in South Africa, which is quite interesting because you've now got actually a state within a state. As I said, state capture. The xenophobic riots of 2015 and just this year in 2019 reflect the malaise which is brewing amongst South Africans who see foreigners as a threat to their benefits and opportunities. However, the recent politico-economic upheavals following Zuma's dismissal of 2 consecutive finance ministers, along with the incessant rand depreciation, has diminished investor trust in the South African economy and may potentially bring the influx of Chinese properties to a halt, even if only temporarily. So, let's go to page 37 in this report. Okay, I'm on the bottom portion of page 36 and it goes into page 37 of this report that's linked below. From the findings of this study, there is no doubt that there is an increased interest by overseas Chinese in residential property development and acquisition in South Africa and Mauritius. The trends in both countries denote that over the next 5 years there will be a marked rise in the presence of Chinese permanent residents, and that their interest would mostly gear towards luxury properties. While this development is happening both in a scattered way by individual buyers and in a structured way through smart cities, which is what our friend Hippo Eyes has been talking about, the common factor between the two formats of residential proliferation is the unstructured fashion with which they are met from the host country's administration. South Africa already faces historical conflicts over land management and is still struggling with its land reforms and redistribution. In this context, as Professor Pienaar notes, the lack of limitations on foreign ownership of residential land access only misses the opportunity for having addressed part of the problem. On the contrary, it leaves a loophole for the multiplication of such acquisitions. While the dipping rand brings more and more Chinese property investors and developers, the wake of an economic crisis triggered by the erratic economic decision-making of Zuma may only bring the faith of existing real estate investors to a stalemate. Now, that, as I said, this report's a few years old, okay? This is under the Zuma presidency, but it's very relevant because we're talking about China and the way it's Chinasisation of South Africa. And the final sentence in this report kind of sums up why we're even talking about this, but we'll get to that in a moment. In the case of Mauritius, as the smart cities develop in the self-contained fashion that they are planned, all while excluding local government in the administration and by focusing on foreign buyers, the Chinese real estate developers are in danger of facing the same situation of stagnation and neglect as faced by Jinfei. A disinterest on part of foreign investors would leave luxury residences empty, with a few locals having the means to afford them. If they are successful in attracting foreign buyers, then the government structure will create distinctly sparsely contained communities of haves and have-nots. In both countries, though, it is clear that Chinese developers are convinced of the growing interest among the Chinese middle class in having second home options in places which are more accessible and affordable to them. China has therefore moved from the government-led benevolent phase of China builds in Africa for Africans, and now instead concentrates on a business-led movement of China builds in Africa for the Chinese. So there you go, guys. Chinasisation of South Africa is underway. Alright guys, please remember to subscribe to be kept informed. Please ring the bell for the updates. Please like this video, and above all, stay safe. And right below this video, you can see the PDF and download it. Cheers guys.